Our second speaker this afternoon here for this session is Dr. Niamh Whitfield, who is a graduate of both UCD and the University of London in both archaeology and art history. And she now combines both these skills to work on early medieval metalwork. She's a Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of London and also the Fellow of the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland. In the past, prior to COVID and the disruption of life, she led study tours throughout Ireland and was a visiting lecturer in art history in both Trinity and UCG. Earlier this year, she published a new book, Design and Technique in Early Medieval Celtic Metalwork. And she is also currently editing and partly writing a study of the Ardagh chalice for the National Museum of Ireland. And she is here to talk to us about the details, the telltale details on insular metalwork. So I'll hand you over to Niamh. Thank you.
Right, can you all hear me? Yes. Good. Now, as you see, I'm going to be talking about minute telltale details on insular metalwork, and I'm going to look at details on 3 different objects. And the first one is the Hunterston brooch there, date probably the second half of the 7th century, and that is in the National Museum of Scotland. The next object in the middle there is the Steeple Bumpstead boss, and the date similar, second half of the 7th century, possibly the first half of the 8th century, and it's in the British Museum. And the third object is, as you will all recognise, the Ardagh chalice, later 8th century, just possibly early 9th century, and of course that's in the National Museum of Ireland just down the road. Right, well now there is the Hunterston brooch, my first object, and it belongs to the same class of brooch as the Tara brooch, but it's probably a generation earlier. But unlike the Tara brooch, this was not found in Ireland, it was actually found in Scotland, just near the border of the Scottish kingdom of Dalriada, which had its counterpart, of course, in Antrim. There you are, Dalriada. However, it was an heirloom when it was discovered, and we know that for sure because there's an inscription on the back in 10th century runes in Old Norse, and it names the owner of the brooch. And fascinatingly, this owner actually has a Gaelic name, Whale Breda, a devotee of St. Bridget. So the object could have been made in Scotland, or it might have been made in Ireland. We really can't say. Right. Now, on the front of the object, which is entirely decorated with filigree and studs, there are no fewer than 8 panels decorated with animal ornament. And here they are. I hope you can see. What we can't see, this one is behind the pin in the centre of the hoop. And we go round on the hoop to there, one in the centre of the terminal, and then its opposite number there, and round we go again, another 2. And finally, the 8th panel is in the centre of the pinhead. And just to have a little look at one of these panels in more detail, if you look at the one which I've actually pointed out here in red, that's shown enlarged on this screen. And as you can see, it's got a little animal. He's looking back over his shoulder, and he has got, there's his head, and he's got a very long ear. And then he's got a long neck there, and it goes round to a spiral marking his shoulder, and there his foreleg, and then his body goes round, and here we have another spiral, this time marking his hip, and here is his hind leg, sorry, and then he has a long tail there. Now you will notice that the body is entirely coated with granules. But what I would like to talk about today is one particular granule, and it's this one right at the back of his mouth. Now, just a little bit technical detail. It's extremely easy to make granules, and here's one method it can be done by an Italian team. Basically, if you melt small pieces of metal and you heat them up, when they cool down, they automatically coalesce into tiny spheres on cooling because of surface tension. So we have here, you chop up wire or you get small bits of metal, you put them into this lidded crucible between layers of charcoal, you heat the whole thing up, and then when it cools down, you tip it out, and what you have a whole load of little granules, and this is them close up, so very straightforward to make. Now, there are no fewer than 6 of the 8 panels of animal ornament on the front of this brooch have got this little feature, the granule at the back of the mouth. There's one, that's the one in the top middle of the hoop, which you didn't see before. He's looking back this way. Here's his foreleg body, a hind neck and tail. There it is there. And this one is looking forward. There he's on the terminal, and there is his little the little granule, and then another one. Sorry, that's on the hoop, that one, and this one's on the terminal. Again, you can see the little granule. Now, the question is this something that the goldsmiths who made the Hunterston brooch invented? Is it just a little decorative feature of their own? Or could it have a longer pedigree? Now, to answer this question, I think we can look at the wise words of the great art historian Ernst Gombrich, who said, "Nothing comes out of nothing. The great ornamental styles could no more have been the invention of one man, however inspired, than could the organ fugue. Anglo-Irish ornament," and by which he means this style, "comes to mind as such a typical end product of a long sequence of what Kupler calls linked solutions. It's much easier to modify, enrich, or reduce a given complex configuration than to construct one in a void. Hence, certain formal sequences resemble the game of cat's cradle, with every craftsman taking over the threads from the hands of his predecessor and giving them an extra twist." A very nice image, I think. So, now the question is, does this device, does it descend from an earlier tradition? Well, I think answering this question does lead to a bigger one, and that's the question of the origin of the early medieval Celtic filigree style. Now, the craft of filigree had no immediate predecessors in Ireland or Scotland. But in the 6th and 7th centuries, as we know, the Gaelic monks established monasteries in Britain and mainland Europe. And they all, of course, also the aristocracy, they did have political contacts with the elite outside Ireland, particularly in Britain. And as a result, they became familiar with what to them was a new style of extremely colourful jewellery, which was fashionable among their Germanic neighbours. And this included the manufacture of, to them, a novel technique, gold filigree. And they were so impressed by this that they adopted it themselves. Now, here we have a map. Okay, well, of course, here are some Irish foundations. We can see they're quite widespread. But actually, the most influential style came actually from Anglo-Saxon England. Now, you may ask, why not on the continent too? And the reason for that actually is that the metalwork styles between Anglo-Saxon England and Francia had diverged considerably by the late 6th and 7th century, which is the period in question. However, so we're back to the Anglo-Saxons are the main influence, but they themselves looked to the ancestral homelands here in Northern Europe, particularly up here in southern Scandinavia. And the Scandinavians themselves derived a lot from classical metalwork. Now, that's a long story, which I'm not going to go into, but they did. It's been demonstrated quite convincingly. So, does this little device of the granule at the back of the mouth of these little filigree animals, is it consistent with this theory? And I think the answer is it is. We can do some little tracing here. Here we have the Hunterston brooch animal. I hope you can see the little bead there. Oops, there it is. We move back now in time to Anglo-Saxon England, and this is a tiny little detail from some animal ornament, filigree animal ornament on Sutton Hoo shoulder cloth, probably late 6th, early 7th century. Then we go back to Scandinavia. You see another this is the head, the beak, and actually it's probably a griffin because it's got an animal's body and a bird's beak. There's the granule. We're still now back in Scandinavia, but notice the granule has moved forward, and in fact is much more, represents something like this, a berry in the beak of a bird, a berry or some small object in a bird's beak, I think quite convincingly. And then this is again a 5th century Scandinavian example, again clearly held in the mouth. And we go back to the classical period, and hey presto, we have this swan-like creature here, which is actually on a spoon. It's there, you see, and can you see it's quite clearly holding a little round object in its beak. Now, just to show these in reality, here we have again the Hunterston brooch. There's the little berry again, or the granule, I should say. Now, this next one is Sutton Hoo. I hope you can see it. There's the eye, the head, the neck, and this is the brow, and there's the little granule. And now we're going back to Scandinavia. You didn't see this one before, but it's another griffin figure with a bird's head and an animal's body. And you see there's the eye, the beak, and there is again at the back of the mouth a granule. And on the final example, we did see a detail of this. There's the head, legs, and you see eye and the berry, or whatever it is, at the back of the beak. And just to give you an idea of scale, we're talking small, okay? And I thought you might just like to see this one detail of an Saxon example. On the one screen, we have the Sutton Hoo shoulder cloths, and I've ringed the area that we've enlarged on the opposite side of the screen. And this little creature from here to there, 8 millimeters. And so there's the granule again. So we can clearly see just this one little detail. We can trace a big story, and that is the origin of the early medieval Celtic filigree style, back to the Anglo-Saxons, back to Scandinavia, back ultimately to the classical world. I could have used many more examples to show you that, but I'm just using this one little detail. Well, the next question to consider is, is there any meaning to these? Are these just a decorative device, or could they have some kind of meaning? And the answer in the case of the classical example here is there is a religious meaning. Because looking at this spoon here, there is an inscription which says, Dei, there you are, Fauni, of the god Faunus. And then that might be G or an I. If it's a G, it might be to do with grains, but it's a bit of mysterious what this means. But we're looking at a god, a Pan-like figure, a god of the woods, a god of the streams, and a protector of the flocks. Also a bit mischievous and could be troublesome like Pan. So it does look as if this is probably an offering made to this god. Now we're fast forward now to early medieval Ireland, to the Tullynall cross from County Roscommon, and we're looking at that panel on the top of the cross there, which is ringed. And it has got, and I hope you can see it, but here we have this figure here, flanked by animals, possibly Christ, because in the Canticle of Habakkuk in the Old Testament, it says, between two living beings, you shall make yourself known, and this is therefore taken as a reference to the Christ figure or to God's figure. There's the two living beings. And notice one of them has this self-same feature. So again, probably some meaning. Could it be a Eucharistic image referring to the grape from which the wine of the Eucharist is made? We can speculate. I think it might well do. And finally then, looking at some manuscripts here, the Book of Kells, on this screen here now ringed, you see again, this is a lion which could represent Christ, and this is presumably the wafer of the Eucharist at the back of his mouth. Here we have a psalter, the Salemberga psalter, and these birds here ringed. You can see quite clearly, possibly again a grape referring to the Eucharist. And so what about the Hunterston brooch? Could there be some kind of religious symbolism behind this feature? Well, there might be, because it's been pointed out that there is a cross here. This forms a cross, and all these little creatures here, probably hounds. They're all looking towards this cross. Well, obviously there's not this one, but they're all looking that direction. So could, again, this have a religious meaning and perhaps a Eucharistic meaning? We can't be sure, but we can speculate. Now, I'm moving on now to something completely different, and that is, we've talked about ornament which is borrowed from the Germanic tradition. We're now going to look at some native ornament. Well, native in the sense that, sorry, it can go back to the European Iron Age, and that is the La Tène style, and in its early medieval incarnation known as the ultimate La Tène style. And what I would like to show you is how drawing complex patterns in the ultimate La Tène style can help reveal the skill of the designers and also the makers. And what I'm going to do, as I mentioned before, we are going to look at the Steeple Bumpstead boss at this sort of pattern on the flange here. Right, good. Now, this object is decorated in the same style as the Hunterston brooch, equally the same style as the Tower brooch and the Lindisfarne Gospels, a style that spanned the foundations of the Order of Columbkilla, the Columban foundations, from Ireland to Scotland to Northumbria. But it was actually found in Essex here, amazingly, but there's no way that it was made in Essex, and how it got to Essex is a mystery. As I said, it may be made in Northumbria. I'm pointing there to Lindisfarne Foundation in Northumbria, which of course had daughter houses. Scotland, there is Iona, which likewise had daughter houses, or Ireland, there is Derry, an early Columban monastery mentioned by Bede in Ireland. Now let's look a little bit more at it. It's actually made of bronze, the whole thing, but gilt. It's fairly big, nearly 13 centimetres in full diameter. And it's divided into 4 quadrants by 4 lions. I'm going to point at them. There is one. They're rather like frogs, really, because I don't think the artist ever saw a live lion. So they weren't very good at doing lions, but anyway, I think they are lions. There's one, there's the next, and here's the next, and here's the next. So the whole thing is divided in 4. Now, it was made by the lost wax technique, and I'm sure you know that means you make your finished product, what you want your finished product to look like in wax, and you carve on the ornament. And then what you do, you encase the whole thing in clay, with leaving some holes. You melt it, out flows the wax, leaving a cavity which reflects the pattern, the design you want, and then you replace the wax with, in this case, bronze, and then you have to break the mold to get your finished product, and you finish it off with some final working to make a nice, neat result. But they had a bit of a problem when they were making this, the wax model, because they had particular problems here with the 4 lions, and it's been established that one of the lions was in the wrong place. It didn't go right. The lions were made separately and then attached to the dome. They had to take it out, and then they had to put it back again. And they didn't quite get the 4 lions absolutely at right angles to each other. The result is that the quadrants are not absolutely equal. And hold that in your mind. That's an important point that I wish to pursue. But just to show you, we're looking at the chords here. Of this one, the chord here would be 5.1 centimetre. Then the next panel along is much smaller, 4.6. Next one, we get a bit bigger here, 4.7. And this is the second biggest one here, 4.85. Because obviously the discrepancies get worse and worse, as it were, the further out you go. So here we are, right at the edge of the outer circle in the design. Just briefly, what was it? Most likely, it was a mount on a wooden cross, like the Tullinally cross, which is made of wood but has metal mounts, probably in the centre here. And we can say that with a fair degree of confidence, because there is this high cross here in one of the Columban monasteries at Kildalton in Islay. And down there you can see that is this boss here, 4 extremely frog-like creatures, but probably again lions, dividing the boss in 4. I mean, it might possibly have been on a shrine, but there you are, there might have been. But I think a cross is more likely. Now, let's look at it a bit more closely. We're talking small again here. The flange is only 9 millimeters wide. That's about the length of one of my fingernails, so it's not big. But it's decorated, they're all decorated with an extremely complicated succession of whorls. There they are, there are 4 in each lot, 4 linked whorls there. And they each form 2 coil spiral. Well, not that one, that's an exception, but they're mainly 2 coil spirals within them. Now, there's a whole standard repertoire of these patterns, which we get not just on this object, we get them in manuscripts and we get them on other pieces of metalwork. For example, we get similar whorls on the Tara brooch on the back, also cast. But just looking at some of the standard patterns now, this one here, they've been given, some of them have been given names by scholars. So this is so-called blind horses, because they don't have eyes. You see, they just have this leaf pattern. I'm not sure that they really are horses, but that's the name of that, given to that particular pattern. Then we have the dodo heads. There you go. You see, because of the way the beak bends over a bit like a dodo. Again, they don't have eyes, these ones. They have this leaf pattern. Then we have little creatures who do have eyes, downturned beaks and upturned crests. Usually 2, but there is 1 somewhere. There you are, downturned beak, upturned crest. And then we have downturned beaks and downturned crests. That's the last one I ringed there. So there's a repertoire of these designs. Now, of course, as I said, this style ultimately descends from the Iron Age La Tène style, and this is Richard Warner devised a sort of pedigree, going back to using Irish examples, the band disc, which is Iron Age then, and the Petrie crown, and then going on. So that's the ultimate, as it were, ancestor, these little bird heads. Now, I said that these are standard patterns. You find them across manuscripts and metalwork, and probably, maybe in other media probably as well. And they're not drawn freehand. It's extremely interesting. We could see the working out on the Lindisfarne Gospels. And the example I'm using, this is these little whorls here, here, and here. This is the front. And on the back, they actually drew the pattern. And you can see see little compasses here, compass work. And in fact, Michel Brown has discovered that they used lead point drawing. And this is apparently one of the earliest examples of this. It was believed that lead point didn't arrive on the scene until much later, but it is here on the Lindisfarne Gospel, and according to Michel, it's also on the Stowe Missal. And Padraig may have something to say about that. So what they probably did then was they worked them out on the back. This is the front, see there's writing, but of course it's in lead point, so it's not that conspicuous. So they planned them out very carefully, using compasses and straight edges, but it's a bit more subtle than that. Those are those 2. You see what these are is, you can see, downturned beak, there's the eye, and there's the crest pointing upwards, 3 of them. And it's been figured out by the late Robert Stevick. He's been sort of reverse engineering these. How did they draw them? How did they plan them? And so this is a detail from this. Oh, I've got the ring wrong there. In here, this little tiny bit of a folium from the Lindisfarne Gospels. The whole thing is about 25 centimeters across, so this is getting small. This is the area. You see there are some dodo heads here, and here we have some blind horses, so-called. And please don't ask me the exact steps, because if you ask me afterwards exactly what happened here, I won't be able to tell you, but I can tell you the principle. The principle is you use a straight edge and a compass, starting with a circle in a square, and you manage to establish using ratios to get fixed lengths, which you can then repeat. So for example, the square root of 2 is 1, and if you divide that unevenly so that the ratio of the large bit of the line, the longer bit to the smaller bit of the line, is the ratio of the longer bit of the line to the line as a whole. It's a sort of magic thing. That's the sort of raise. Once they got the fixed measures, then they didn't need to measure them. That's how they're so accurate. And this is Robert's suggested working out of this design. We go through these various steps, and you end up, you see, there's that little head, there's the head and the neck. Which one is it? Have I got the right one? That's this. No, it's the wrong one. I've got the wrong one. But you can see you've got head, neck, nose, as it were, and neck, and then the little head and the neck. So it's a very clever use of geometry to plan these designs, and goes back to the, the Iron Age. It's not invented in the early Middle Ages. It's been shown, and indeed, of course, the Romans, when they were constructing things, the Parthenon, for example, the Pantheon, is planned using the golden section. So it's not an invention, but it's a very, very subtle and clever use to make extremely complex designs. Now, of course, the Lindisfarne Gospels is vellum pages, as it were, and we're working on the flat. Now, of course, the Steeple Bumpstead boss is cast, and it's cast with some low relief. And the pattern is actually raised, you see there. And so when they were making the lost wax mantle, they would have carved it out. And the construction lines don't remain, so you don't see any clues here to how it was done. What I was interested in was following the raised lines themselves. And what does the pattern consist of? And to do that, I drew them, because if there's one way to really see something, it's you draw it. And this is how I worked. Here's the gospel. What I did was I took photographs, first of all. Then I blew them up. You really need to blow them up good and big, because if you really want to be accurate, the patterns are so subtle and small, you're not going to be accurate unless you start big. And this is me picking out the raised lines here. And now we're talking, remember, the whole thing is 9 millimeters across the whole panel. So I sat there in the British Museum with the thing under my nose and a magnifying glass. Particularly, you can't always use a microscope, obviously, in a thing like this. But I can't really draw. So the last stage, the beautiful drawings you've seen are not by me. They're by the archaeological illustrator Nick Griffith. And Nick and I, again, sat in the British Museum. Nick did not take my word for a single solitary detail, so we had discussions. But the drawings are by Nick. So what did I learn by this exercise? Well, I could see the way the pattern worked, and I'm going to, they're picked out, the lines in red and blue, to make it easier. We'll start off here. Now, at the end of each line, there's a nice ending with a so-called trumpet pattern there. You see, unfortunately, because this thing was actually nailed to a church door in Essex, there are holes, so that it's not complete. But they each do end in this trumpet pattern, so-called because earlier scholars imagined this is a trumpet shape, sort of with and this lentoid creates the mouth of trumpet, and it's as if it's two trumpets kissing, as it were. So that's why it's called a trumpet pattern. It's a line, it expands into this triangular shape, divided with this lentoid, and then it goes round into a trumpet. Okay, we'll see this again in a minute. And so let's see what actually happens. Here we're starting from the outside now. We go round the red, and that's linked to that. Now this blue is going to be linked to, this blue blind horse is going to be linked to this blue dodo. We go round, and then there's this link with the leaf, round again into here, and then red to red, round the link, and then we go in, and so on. Now, I thought this was all going swimmingly until I came to this panel here, this longer panel, which is this panel. And I just could not figure out what was going on for ages, until the penny dropped with me. This is a longer panel, and there's a bit of trompe-l'oeil going on here, because obviously the designers did not want to have this really quite dramatic discrepancy to show up. So they bodged it, but in, I think, a really clever way. So what they did was, if you count, you see there's two lines there, 1, 2, 3. They gave an extra rotation. So you don't really spot it when you're looking at it, that actually, you're looking at a much longer panel here. These two are not to scale, but that is much longer panel. Again, look, 2 lines there, 3 there. Now we have 3 here. What's going on? This is the second longest panel. So they introduce an extra wall there. So how clever is that? I mean, maybe I'm easily impressed, but I actually think that's extremely clever. But even if you think that that was a simple device to introduce this extra rotation, to actually, plan these very subtle but accurate little designs, plan them on this very small scale, and then execute them, I think, shows the real mastery of the designers and the smiths at this phase of design. And I could have shown you, to make the same point, something from the Ardagh chalice. I could have shown you something from the Derrynshire pattern or the tower brooch, these grade A objects. But I've chosen this object as I've done so much work on it. There you are. So this is the longer panel and this is the shorter panel. And I think that this way of design, which was inherited from the Iron Age, the people, I think they were apprenticed to their fathers or maybe somebody else at a young age. I think they would have been trained in this way of designing from really quite early on in life. And this method of introducing these little grace patterns, these little trumpet patterns and these lendroid patterns was so ingrained that when they came to cast in lost wax, using lost wax, therefore getting subtle effects, animal ornament, this is a pair of animals, also from the Steeple Bumpstead boss, but I've enlarged here this area. And notice, what do we have? They introduce these little grace notes. Here's the mouth, but it becomes a trumpet spiral. There you go. And there it is. Then they even introduce the little lentroid into this ear at the end there. And look here again, they can't stop themselves. And there's a single animal below here. You see, well, we'll just point it out. Look, you see, again, here we go again, a lentroid, in we go to a spiral, and this limb too, we see it. And I think that people couldn't help themselves. This is how they did things. And so I think if these dogs, I think they're probably dogs, if they could bark, I think they would have had the accent of an old Irish speaker, I would suggest. And this is, if you're thinking of Gombrick's extra twist. Now, I'm going to be very swift with the next example. It's the Ardagh chalice, and I'm returning to the subject of animal ornament. And this time it's animals on the bowl-girdle, again in filigree. There are 2 panels out of the panels, 8 panels on the bowl-girdle. Well, there are 6 originally. 2 with this particular design, 2 on each face. And now let's look at it in detail. There's the head of the animal again. There's the eye, there's the mouth, and there it is, the drawing. It's down below here, the head with the eye and the mouth. Long neck again, spiral marking the hip, the shoulder, I should say, then the leg is bent that way, leg, body, back to the hip, another spiral, and there's the leg bent again. And the tail goes, whoops, all the way to there. But there's one tiny detail, very intriguing, which I didn't point out, and that is there's a horn here. So what are we looking at? There's on each one, you see, they all have them, and there are 8 of these creatures, 4 pairs, so this is not an accident, it's quite deliberate. Right, well, they knew how to do deer, and they knew how to do antlers. This is a deer, looking back, here's the little legs, and there's the antlers, quite distinct. On the Derrynshire pattern, ditto here, Derrynshire pattern, again, perfectly distinct antlers. Now, they knew how to do goats, because here we have a goat from the Book of Kells, and the goat's horn goes back. My opinion is what we're looking at here is a unicorn with a curl at the tip of it, because unicorns were very much in the air in this period. This is from the Carolingian kingdom in Francia, and you see there's his single horn. Now, I gave a paper about the animal ornament, which I'm not going into detail here, what I suggested, on the Ardagh chalice at this conference here that was held in Galway in 2014. Another speaker at the same conference was Professor Michael Clark of NUI Galway. Michael's keynote lecture was not about the Ardagh chalice, but he planned to publish. So we had a correspondence about the identity of the various animals on the chalice, including my suggestion that there were unicorns. Back came a very excited email to me from Michael saying, "Dear Niamh, unicorns, music to my ears, but I'm off on holidays now, back later." And I was left thinking, what on earth is Michael thinking of here? I hadn't a clue. What he actually had in mind was a really clever idea, I think. He thought there was an allusion to Psalm 21 in the Vulgate on the chalice. And this is a psalm which was believed and repeatedly alluded to as foretelling the crucifixion. And indeed, the very first line, the psalmist says, he's very miserable, first of all, and he describes a whole host of miseries and suffering, and finally he turns himself to God. But the first thing he says in the first line of the psalm is, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Which, of course, we recognize from Matthew and Mark's account of the crucifixion. Christ says, "I thirst." The psalmist is also extremely thirsty. And even the episode of the lots being thrown for the garment of Christ, this also occurs in Psalm 21. So there was a clear link. The crucifixion was seen as a fulfillment of this. Okay, so why did Michael think that we were looking at an allusion to Psalm 21? Well, here are 3 lines from the psalm. Line 21. And it's, by the way, it's the Douay Rance version, not the King James Bible. That's Psalm 22 in the King James Bible. Okay. "Deliver, O God, my soul from the sword, my only one from the power of the dog. Save me from the lion's mouth, and save my lowness from the horns of the unicorn, in the plural." So do we have lions, dogs, and unicorns on the Ardagh chalice? Well, in my opinion, we do. We have up here, these are incised under the roundels on the front, clear lions with little snub noses, wide open mouths. And notice the mouths in the psalm, it says, "They have opened their mouths above me like a roaring and ravening lion." Equally, I think these are hounds. Myself, there's the eye, very different from these, you can see with these nasty fangs. Again, wide open mouths. So lions, hounds, and, in my opinion, unicorns. Now, if Michael is correct, and personally I think he is, we get these also in Carolingian manuscripts, and very briefly I must show you, this is Psalm 21 in the Stuttgart Psalter. There is the unicorn with his horn there. We have the lion, and over here the poor psalmist is being bitten by dogs, both his arms and his legs there. And there is even a chalice making an explicit link, and I'm going to be very quick. Indeed, I'm going to jump over the next object, but the same theme is illustrated on these pix, Carolingian, likewise, unicorn there, hounds and lions. So I think, what do we conclude from all this? Okay, if you don't look at these little details on this style of art, you do really miss the point, I think, of the meaning of complex designs. And scrutiny of tiny details allows conclusions to be drawn about the origins of early medieval Celtic metalwork, as on the Hunterston brooch, aspects of its particular character, and the meaning of some images. And early medieval art, an important point, I think, we really do have to look at it in its international and Christian context. So the makers, they were responding to inspiration from contemporary cultures, drawing on a long tradition going back to the classical times. And of course, they were also responding to Christian messages in the Bible. Thank you.
That was incredible. There was so much detail there, Niamh. What a great piece of detective work you've completed there, and obviously you still have so much more to go.